Gators Breakdown episode 129 is ready to go, and it's a big one recapping National Signing Day of 2018, reviewing it here on Gators Breakdown. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, and joining me, the co-host Bill Sykes and Will Miles. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. And the founder of readingreaction.com, Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Guys, no lack of fun, no lack of worry, no lack of intensity, no lack of whatever the heck happened on National Signing Day.
Yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster, man, but this is what it's all about. You know, reinforcements are on the way. Found out who the Gators are going to bring in, some in the spring and the rest coming in the fall to help out and try to rebuild things back to where they once were and establish some new Gator glory. So this is a really fun day, all things considered.
Yeah, man, we had Chucky dolls. We had family members walking out after the announcements. We had guys going to Nebraska and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. So very interesting time. It'll be interesting to talk about it tonight.
It's never a dull moment in Gator Nation. Isn't that right, guys? Isn't that the motto?
If there is one, it sure as heck wasn't today. I can tell you that.
I mean, people wonder how we can do a podcast on just Florida Gators football and days like this. Of course, I mean, National Signing Day it is, but just think of the things that happen. As you mentioned, Mom walks off as Jacob Copeland makes his announcement. Trolling with Chucky dolls, as that was mentioned. It's there's plenty of drama when it comes to Florida football.
Yeah, there's some pro wrestling similarities there. I can say
that. Woo! There we go. Had to get the Ric Flair woo in.
Yeah, that's how I was feeling once they finally turned things around and brought a couple of those guys in to close strong late in the day. Because, man, I'll tell you, it got a little dicey there in the middle of the day.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because, you know, there were some expectations going in, and you go back and look at it and say, if Emory Jones had signed today, I think it's a whole, at least for me, it's a whole different feeling. So it's weird having the early signing day and the late signing day, and sort of trying to figure out how you're supposed to interpret and how you're supposed to feel about both of those combined. Because really, it's a 2018 class; it's not one or the other.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things we probably will try to separate for our listeners tonight, for Gator fans, is you can get really caught up in that roller coaster and the way the moment feels. If it's trending down, if you get into a run of missing some recruits, or if you get into a run of landing a couple of big time recruits, depending on which of those moments you're in, you can say, oh, the class is feeling really good or it's feeling really bad. But we're going to try to help you take a step back tonight and look at it in the big picture, not based on those moments or just today as signing day, because you also had early signing day, and say, okay, now that the dust has settled, who are they bringing in? How did that stack up against what Gator coaches have done in the past and in first-year classes and versus the state of the program, and help you to evaluate based on that bigger picture.
Yeah, we'll get into that. That brings a question I want to ask you guys too, pertaining to that. Early signing day did throw a wrench in how we attack signing day, and if people actually want to go back and listen to what we thought about the early enrollees, early enrollees and early signees that were brought about in December, you can go find that episode that talks about those recruits. But of course, the big announcement with Gators Breakdown this week, guys, we're partnering with WJXT Channel 4 News for Jacks, place of my employment for over a decade now, and of course, it's a TV station in Jacksonville, the number one station in Jacksonville. And, they've been looking for ventures of getting into podcasting. And look, I was already doing one here at Gators Breakdown, as everybody knows. And they've, kind of found out about that, and they wanted to partner up with Gators Breakdown. And let's look and partner up and get the word of Gators Breakdown out there to the Jacksonville area, the Orlando area, and more Gator fans. And I think that's, guys, that's what we want. We want this to be out there for Gator Nation. We've built this thing amongst ourselves, and it's gotten pretty big. But now we have a media member that can help us put it out even more to Gator Nation. And I can't be, more excited about that and partnering up with them.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be great to see where this goes and reach out to more Gator fans to continue the dialogue that we've started on our own. And now that they're partnering with us, I think we'll be able to bring more voices into the fold and hear more opinions. And I think we'll all be better for it.
Yeah, and one of the things I think we really pride ourselves on is making sure that we're in contact with the fans and with our fans on Twitter, and really interacting with you guys. So certainly make sure that that keeps coming. And for anybody who's new listening, that's something that we want to definitely do, is interact with you guys and get your ideas and your thoughts, and talk back and forth offline when the podcast is over.
Yeah, and if you are new, this is what Gators Breakdown is. It's we pride ourselves on data-driven analysis and our opinions as well. It's not just throwing a whole bunch of numbers and hoping they get retained out there, but that's what we do here, and we back up our thoughts with numbers and stats and data. And Bill, you really enforced that when you come along about a year ago, and I think we've taken a mold of that and even furthered that thought and to be able to come up with a pretty unique podcast, different than some other Gator podcasts out there. They don't get to dive in like we do. They do a good job as well, but we just wanted to bring something different, and I think that's what we do.
Sure. That's what we're going to do. We try to base everything we say on fact. We want to back up our claims, and we want to get you guys right to the core of the matter. Whether you're a casual fan of Gator football and college football, because we do have rival fans that listen to, or you are more of an advanced person that kind of nerds out like I do on the numbers, we want to kind of have a broad appeal, but we want ultimately to make sure that if you're talking at the water cooler, if you're talking to your friends, that you're getting accurate information as best we can based on fact, and you have the data to back up your opinions, and then formulating your own. You may not agree with us, but we always want to be truthful with you guys, and we want to give you the straight truth based on the numbers.
And we're not always right.
Speak for yourself, Dave.
But yeah, so definitely on news4jax.com, they'll be creating a webpage. It'll be news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll be able to find the podcast there. They'll be sharing it amongst that website as well, but you can still always find it on there. And they'll post the links as well and you guys, you're used to finding it. You'll still find it on the sites, the SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, whichever way you prefer. So plenty of ways to get Gators Breakdown. Also, remember, you can follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. When you're on iTunes, Google Play, please rate, review the show. Let Gator Nation know what they're getting with Gators Breakdown. Guys, I guess we'll just kind of start with how the day went. As Bill mentioned, it was a little disappointing morning, and then we get to the afternoon, and I was trying to tell people to hold off. Let's see how the day ends. I don't think Florida's going to miss out on everybody that they're in competition for other schools, and that's pretty much the way it turned out. But if you start in the morning, Caleb Tanner announced that he's going to Nebraska, so that was the crystal balls were trending that way. Auburn was in the running there. It was Nebraska in the end. And then come Nicholas Petit-Frere. Some Gator fans, most were disappointed. I think a lot of us were 50-50 on where he would go. And like I said on Monday when we were talking about where we were kind of predicting where these guys would go, I said, I let my bias take over, but I picked Florida, but I wasn't confident in that pick whatsoever. Urban Meyer comes in. Frere visits Ohio State this past weekend, the last visit weekend. Guys, it's no surprise and we, us as Gator fans know it just as well as anybody that Urban Meyer was able to come in to the state of Florida and grab a 5-star offensive tackle.
Yeah, it shouldn't have been much of a surprise. I mean, and these things happen. I mean, sometimes kids are just head out of state and they have their own reasoning. He liked the academic plan that it laid out for him. Obviously, Urban Meyer's in the picture, like you said. I mean, this is not the third, 5-star offensive tackle that Urban Meyer's landed. He does this with regularity. He pulls players from all over the country. It happens. Mullen is up and running, but probably not at 100%. He's just getting started at Florida. So, it happens.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's a good thing to be competing with Ohio State. So if you're in the final two with Ohio State on a lot of different guys, then and you start to get those guys to come to Florida, you're going to be better off for it. So you lose this battle, but you keep pushing ahead in the war, and that's what he's going to have to do in 2019. Is Mullen's going to have 4 or 5 of these guys that he's going up against Ohio State with, and then you bring in 2 or 3 of those guys, and you got a really talented team because of it.
Yep, not long after that, it was followed up by the first good news of the day. Andrew Chatfield, if I'm down there in American Heritage, commits and signs with the Gators. Big-time pickup, position of need, I think, in this new 3-4 defense. outside defensive end, outside linebacker, rusher. We'll kind of see how he fits in here. But that's when the good news started for the Gators today, guys.
Yeah, Chatfield, I really like his burst off the edge, his first step. I think he's a guy that can get in the backfield and disrupt as a 3-4 outside linebacker and maybe even drop into space at times. He's a guy that can disrupt in the way that Grantham, the defensive coordinator of Florida, wants to do with his defense. And so I think he was an important piece. They needed some front seven help, and they got it in Chatfield.
Yeah, and with some of the guys who Florida has coming back in terms of CeCe Jefferson and other guys like that, having some flexibility between somebody who can put a hand down and be a defensive end or drop in coverage as a linebacker, both Jefferson and Chatfield sort of have that sort of ability. So you'll be able to put guys in positions where they have in a position of strength, and sort of having that flexibility, and that's something Dan Mullen's been talking about a lot.
Bill, you know where we're going next and who we're going with next, right?
Nesta?
Yeah, you set the Twitter world on fire Tuesday night, the night before National Signing Day. It got a little, I guess, quote unquote scary. That was the word that was thrown out there.
Yeah, I guess I should clarify what happened, right?
Yeah, so you promised everybody you would. Look, we weren't going to. The point of contention here was we weren't going to try and upstand a kid making his commitment. So that's kind of where, it comes out where Bill's kind of vague with the information you were trying to share.
Yeah, look, for like the whole week, probably the last 2 weeks, you and I and Will, we keep hearing this chatter about, Silvera's going to Florida. And while we can't say that all the people that he told and it kind of fed back to us who was being told this, it was people that are directly connected to the program in some ways. And it was people that I believe Nesta Silvera was telling him this. Well, sure enough, last night, I was told and shown that some Chucky dolls were bought for the announcement of Chatfield and Silvera, their high school teammates. And the plan was that they were going to bring Chucky back to the program. And in case you don't remember, Chucky doll, like the movie, Child's Play, the horror movie, Dom Easley, the defensive tackle that played for Florida years ago, came in the class of 2010 in the NFL. He used to carry around a Chucky doll. That was kind of his trademark. And then there was a short-lived tradition in the Will Muschamp years where he started passing that on to a defensive lineman. And so the idea was that they were going to bring that back. And they made the plan and bought the dolls. And last night, I saw it with my own two eyes. I saw some other things I can't divulge, but some communication where they were saying Silvera was coming in. But I still, you and I both know we've just been so skeptical because we heard that Silvera was recruiting from Miami on his visit. And so we had this weird conflicting information out there. And knowing that Silvera was visiting Miami late in the process, I just never could get on board. And that's why I didn't predict him to Florida on our show a few days ago, because it just didn't seem like it added up to a Florida commitment. But I wanted to kind of pass that along to fans and let them, Gator fans, know that there's something going on here. But I said, I think the way I put it was, this may turn out to just be a rumor. But if this is not a rumor, it's going to be like the memory that we take from this class, because that would be huge to steal these two people if they pulled out the Chucky dolls, and it'd be very symbolic and have some swag there. And then I put, the last word I put was scary. And that was kind of my hint about the Chucky dolls to kind of link the whole thing. And of course, I took a lot of heat because I am sensitive to people like this whole mystery recruit thing that never materializes and the fake buzz that people generate. But it was real, And then sure enough, Silvera and Chatfield show up at their announcement with the Chucky dolls. But the thing is Silvera is still announced for Miami, and it was kind of like half-hearted troll, but it was weirdly telegraphed, so I don't think anybody bought it at all.
Right.
And but Chatfield did. He pulled out the Chucky doll, and I think it had a little gator hat or something, and he announced for Florida, so he was bringing it back. But yeah, so that was the thing. That's how it went down. The Gators did go 1-for-1 on it. Chucky did come back, so it turned out to be true. I don't know if it was an 11th hour decision by Silvera or if it was just a really weak troll attempt. And then it's like a lot of people kind of when they showed up and I told them, they're like, well, that's obvious he's trolling. I'm like, yeah, it is now that he showed up with the doll announcement. But beforehand, when he was telling these other people, it wasn't so obvious. So that's the full story.
Oh, man. That was just, it was so.
That's the kind of day we had.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. That was signing day in a nutshell.
Yeah.
We're done. We're done.
Well, unfortunately, Silvera's a really good player.
Yes.
So it would have been nice to have seen him in orange and blue, but obviously to get Chatfield as well is a big deal. So, hey, Bill, we appreciate you passing it on, and certainly not ruining the moment, because it could have been a really cool moment for those guys, and that's the last thing we want to do.
Yeah, I don't care where a kid goes. I'm not here to hurt somebody, and that's their moment. They earned these announcements, and it sure is heck a lot better than what Caleb Tanner did. I don't know if you guys saw that announcement. I mean, a little half-hearted troll with a Chucky doll doesn't hurt anybody,
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of ruining the moment, Malcolm Lamar, of course, Florida was in for it for him. FSU and some other people out there kind of ruined his moment by putting out there that he was joining FSU's program. And he kind of shoots back out on Twitter. It's like, no, that's fake. That's not happening. I think we all knew he was going to end up in FSU, but that is kind of what happened. It was they upstaged the kid. ESPN did it. And some others out there. It didn't let Malcolm Lamar have his moment. So I never really thought he was coming to Florida, but it was even after he threw out it's fake tweet. So it's just another guy that Florida was in on. Didn't get in the end. He stays committed and goes to FSU in Willie Taggart there. And then come the big disappointment, the first big disappointment of the day, of the morning. Noah Boykin, cornerback from Maryland, ends up signing with Notre Dame. There were, a lot of rumors coming out like late last night and this morning that he may want to stick close to home, and Virginia actually got thrown into the mix there, not Maryland, who he was previously committed to. I still personally thought he would end up in the Florida class, even as of this morning when those other rumors started. But, it does seem that the rumor of him wanting to stay close to home actually wasn't true. He actually just ended up wanting to go to Notre Dame.
Yeah, poor Virginia. They thought they were in that one. They thought they were finally going to get a big-time recruit, and not so much. No, go ahead.
I mean, I think the real downside to this is that Mullen didn't get any cornerbacks for this class. So that was really where the Boykin disappointment comes in. He's ranked in the mid 300s, so he's a very good player, but we didn't miss out on a top 30 player or anything like that. Certainly there were 5 cornerbacks who came in last year. 3 of those guys were 4 or 5 star recruits. But to miss and not have any corners for a class is a significant thing.
That is if Trey Dean can't play corner. And I think he'll get a shot out there, though. He's 4-star DB that they flipped from. He was a former Tennessee commit. They set him in the early signing period, and so if he can't, then yeah, that's a good point.
So that rounded out the morning, and a lot of Gator fans were worried because at some points also didn't sound good for Jacob Copeland. Malik Langham, they started coming out late last night that he was a Florida lean, but look, when you're going head-to-head with Nick Saban, you never know what can happen. And Nick Saban put the full court press on, so it was a lot of, look, Nick Saban's putting the full court press on Jacob Copeland. He's putting the full court press on Malik Langham. Can we see the guys that we're targeting in the afternoon not end up being Gators in this class, end up being on signing day, kind of a disaster, for that one day, not overall, but for what was happening on National Signing Day. So, but we do get to the point where Jacob Copeland does commit to the Gators, and his mom walks away as soon as he announced for Florida. Walks in front of the camera, walks in front of everything ESPN was doing. I thought they put the kid in a bad spot by asking who that was and all that stuff, and kind of making him ask or answer questions about what was going on with somebody walking off the table that he was making his announcement at. But it was a big pickup for Florida. There was some questions if he was going to pick Florida over Alabama, and as I mentioned, going head to head with Nick Saban for a guy that he really wants. So we heard there was a lot of communication between Saban and Copeland the last few days, putting the full court press on. But this was a guy that was previously committed to Jim McElwain and company, and this is the type of wide receiver now that I think can come in, and he's very versatile. You can put him anywhere on the field. You can have some reverses. You can put him in the slot. You can put him outside. You can put him downfield. I think this is a big-time pickup in many ways for Mullen because you beat Alabama for him, and he's just a good player in general.
Well, heck, he's from Pensacola Escambia High School, isn't he? And that's
Yeah.
Emmett Smith's high school, I believe. But it's a place that's been very unfriendly to the Gators over the years. And I think Trent Richardson went there, and they thought they were going to get him, but never could. They call it Floribama down there for a reason. It's kids typically either go to Alabama or Florida State. It's not Gator territory. And they went in there and got a really good inside-out weapon. He's a guy that can take carries in the backfield. He can line up at wide receiver, like you said. He can touch the ball in a number of ways. It's a guy that really, especially at the end of the day, the way things were going, Mullen had to have. And he was just a really nice rebound for the day and for the class. Just top 100 national player. So, and really, you mentioned the Alabama factor. He's one of several battles that Mullen won versus Nick Saban this year. And I think that not only shows maybe a little vulnerability in Saban right now, but also some big-time chops for Mullen.
And with all of the offensive struggles that Florida has had for, 8 years now, but particularly the last 3 years, to bring in Justin Watkins, ranked 89th in the country, Jacob Copeland, 69th in the country, and then you've got transfers, Van Jefferson and Trevon Grimes, who were ranked 106th and 41st overall in the country as recruits when they were committing. Really the wide receiver position at Florida has been just remade in the last 2 months under Dan Mullen, and for an offense that struggled and really has struggled to make big plays, to get the ball to guys in space, that's a big deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say, we kind of touched this on a little bit on the last show, but this is the highest rated wide receiver group that Florida's brought in the last 10 years. In 2008, they brought in Carl Moore, who was a junior college 4-star, TJ Lawrence, the same, Frankie Hammond, and Omarius Hines. Those guys had a lot of talent. The problem is Florida stopped recruiting quarterbacks about that time under Urban Meyer. And I mean that sincerely. I think they had 2 years when they didn't recruit one. They had Cam Newton transfer out, and after that, they just really didn't bring in the high-rated quarterbacks at a very high frequency. And so those guys were, to me, largely wasted. And but here we are. Now we've got a blue-chip quarterback coming in, Emory Jones. You've got one on campus in Franks, which we hope they can get his game turned around a little bit. But the weapons in the passing game have been reintroduced. You got a 4-star Kyle Pitts at tight end. Not to mention they may get a little help out of the backfield from Iverson and Clement. And suddenly things are looking up as far as the weapons in the cupboard.
Yeah, I agree. And I know we'll get into that more, but you really have to like the depth you have at wide receiver and running back to help whoever is behind center at the quarterback position. Then more good news comes. Richard Garage keeps his commitment to Florida this afternoon. I really like this. Of course, Florida, we needed an offensive lineman after Petit Friere decides not to come to Florida. But, being able to – a guy that flirted with Auburn and Clemson, 2 other big-time programs who of course, are bringing in recruits left and right, and especially, Clemson, who really had a great class as well and really could have added to their class with another big-time blue-chip prospect with Garage, and being able to beat a team who's been in the playoff the last 3 seasons, and Auburn, who really come on strong to give Florida some troubles with some recruits that they were fighting for, and he come off of a visit there as well. I just think it speaks to Mullen to be able to go against the other big boys and keep a guy who was, we didn't know how a lot of these guys who were early enrollees or early signees would take to Mullen when you get to go visit campus for the first time with the new staff. Garage was one of those guys, and it seems like there was enough there to keep him close to home.
There were, and we really needed this one. We need a Garage not only from the standpoint of you just put a top 100 national recruit on your roster that plays offensive tackle that's got the frame to grow out and be an all-SEC caliber player in a position where you've been hurting for years and years and years. But you also really wanted to see Hevesy go out and land a guy that was, like you said, you had to compete for other teams with him, a guy that everybody wanted, and show that he was going to be someone that could hold his own in recruiting after they got rid of Brad Davis, a guy that was generally well liked by recruits. And so while this wasn't a gangbusters offensive line class, it's not, I don't think they got the Pounceys and Carl Johnson and some of these other types coming in, but Garage has that potential. And that's not to say that Griffin McDowell and Chris Blake and Noah Banks, that's not to say that they're bad prospects. It's just to say that they didn't have the same prestige. But they did get that guy. to show that maybe, hey, you know what, maybe Hevesy can get it done. And they got 4 bodies there. McDowell was a guy that Mullen had previously evaluated. So it feels like they've got some guys they like in there. And I think, Will, you mentioned on the last show, let's face it, Mississippi State's offensive lines have been better than Florida's as of late. So maybe Hevesy knows what he's doing, huh?
Yeah, well, and it's also important to note that the Pounceys didn't come in Urban Meyer's first year. And so when you're really analyzing these classes, I do think you need to take that into account, that if you look back at Urban Meyer's team in 2005, there were certainly some starters who came in on that. But you're talking about Ryan Stamper, David Nelson, Lewis Murphy, guys like that, Keaston Moore. Those are the guys who came in that class. The guys we remember that Urban Meyer brought in, those real high-level recruits, those guys all came in 2006, 2007, and 2008. And so we do need to keep that in mind when we're analyzing this and saying, okay, who did he bring in? I mean, a guy who's ranked 89th in the country at left tackle is a really good asset. That's somebody that you want on your team, and you want to add those guys all year long. And every year, anytime you have an opportunity to add somebody of that caliber, you want to add them. This is not settling. He's a really good player.
Yeah, and especially when you missed out on Petit Frere and Barnes and Montelis there, you had to get one of these high-profile offensive linemen that come from your home state.
They do, and this is probably a good time just to remind our new listeners. You'll hear us talk about star ratings and talk about high-profile, high-ranked recruits, and I know a lot of people have differing opinions on that. But we've done quite a bit of research, and you can kind of go back through past episodes, or you can reach out to us on Twitter if you'd like, and we can point you to some of those specific episodes where we found some scientific links to our study and correlations between higher star rankings and success, both in the NFL, making teams like All SEC and winning national championships. So we'll present the data and based on that, with that being assumed. But yeah, they got a guy, like you said, he's a 4-star tackle. He's an 81st best player in the country, one of the top 10 offensive linemen in the country. Mm-hmm. He's a foundation, a cornerstone for your offensive line as you look to rebuild this offense. A lot of people probably saw me tweet. I retweeted this today. Mullen is the first coach in modern Florida history, in the post-Spurrier era, since the advent of star rankings. He's the first one who in his first class brought a 4-star quarterback in, a 4-star running back, a 4-star wide receiver, a 4-star offensive lineman, and a 4-star tight end. You want to fix an offense? That's a great way to do it. Heck, I think the only position on the team that they didn't bring one in is defensive tackle. Of course, they had a 3-star kicker, but kickers are never rated 4-star. So just about every position on the team, we've seen blue chip, or what we mean by that is 4- and 5-star talent come into this roster this year. This is excellent news.
Yep, and at the end of the day was the big surprise. And I didn't think I liked this guy as a prospect. He visited Florida and had a really good visit a couple weeks ago. Malik Langham, defensive end out of Alabama, out of the state of Alabama, was thought to be in Alabama lean for the last couple of weeks, even after visiting Florida. Then the rumblings a couple of days, or yesterday on Tuesday, day before National Signing Day, is you started seeing some crystal balls and some talk that Langham was really strongly looking at Florida, and maybe even let the coaches know on Tuesday. Saban puts the full court press and maybe put some doubt in his head, and there was some worry in the morning, but as the day went on, you started hearing more and more that Langham would be a Gator, and he signs, in the afternoon around 3:30. I think Mullen's press conference was scheduled for 3:30, but he delayed it, I think, just before after he could find out what Langham was going to do. And this was the one, I think, on the defensive side of the ball, what Nick Saban's known for, what Alabama's known for. You go and get a high-profile commit or a high-profile prospect out of that state against Nick Saban, sends a sign. And I like the way the kid plays. I think he can play the run good. I think he plays the pass good. I think he's a guy you can move all over this defensive line, and somebody who would, I think, looking at what Nick Saban wants to do, you were able to pull him away from the best college football coach ever.
Yeah, I think this has less to do with pulling him away from Saban and more to do with they really needed a defensive lineman. I mean, I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago talking about teams that build top 5 offenses and teams that build top 5 defenses. And it was really clear when you looked at the recruiting rankings of those defenses that the strength of all of those defenses was on the defensive line. The secondary strength of those defenses was at linebacker, and then the corners, there was less correlation with the secondary than there was anywhere else on those defenses. And so defensive linemen are critical. And this is the only one really that's been signed at this point, unless Dorian Gerald comes in, who's going to be committing on Friday, I guess. But, he's the only defensive lineman. I guess Chatfield's a little bit of a tweener, but he's not necessarily a defensive end. Specifically. So I think it's a big deal to bring in a blue chip quality guy at defensive line, because that's where you build teams that win in the SEC, is on the offensive line, on the defensive line. And, Mullen brought in 4 offensive linemen in this class, but this was the only defensive lineman.
He's the only big body defensive lineman. Chatfield, I think, is a guy that's like 6'1", 6'2", 220. He might max out 245 or something and come off the edge, and it'd be a very good player. But as far as the beef, that's Langham. He's a guy that's about 6'5", 270, I think 265. But, I've even seen a few comments where they said he could maybe grow into an elite left tackle. He's got that big of a frame, but he moves his feet well. He can play defense, especially as a 3-4 defensive end. The kid is, he comes off very intelligent. Just, I've heard him talk, and I think this guy is the real deal. Personally, I do. You went into Alabama and you took a guy that Auburn and Alabama actually wanted, and not in the sense that they circled him back around late, who we saw that a couple times in McElwain. Got some good players out of Alabama, but not those guys where Nick Saban said, "This is my guy. I want this guy." Mullen went and got Langham, and when you hear him talk, I think now I will go on a tirade about academics and how people misunderstand what recruits mean by that. Normally, they mean the ability of a school to keep them qualified and lay out an individual tutoring path in a way to help them succeed after football. But this guy was like, oh, wait, Florida's like second best in the SEC behind Vanderbilt. And he actually meant it like fans meant it. And I'm like, man, this guy's like, he's thinking long-term about his business career. And he's got maybe an elite NFL left tackle, but he's got defensive end feet. I'm like, sign me up, man. This guy's going to be perfect for Grantham.
Yeah, I'm excited to see him. He visited Florida, and I looked at his tape, and I was like, man, if there's any way we could pull this guy away from Alabama, we need to do it. And I was just really surprised that that it could happen. Just going back the last couple of weeks, we didn't hear anything. We heard he had a nice visit, and that was really it. But besides that, when it was we were putting mock classes together and all that good stuff, I didn't even have him on the list because I didn't really think it was possible.
Yeah, I mean, we had Caleb Tanner. I had Caleb Tanner in mind, and Caleb Johnson. And Johnson, I was a little bit of a loss. He went to Auburn, but I like this guy. I like Langham better than Tanner. That's not sour grapes. He's got a bigger frame. I think he can be a more disruptive force and be a little more versatile, bring that beef that they need on that defensive line. I think he was a tremendous pickup.
I agree. So, guys, when it's all said and done, after early signing day and national signing day, Florida ends up with the 14th ranked class on the 24/7 composite, a total of 19 signees, 12 4-stars, and 7 3-stars. Gators have 4th ranked class in the SEC, and that's the highest ranking in the SEC since 2013 when they ranked 2nd. So if you go by average recruit rating, the Gators are ranked 11th in the nation with a score of 90.69. That's one spot behind Florida State there. So not bad in Dan Mullen's first cycle of recruiting for the Gators. Now, this still includes safety Randy Russell in the rankings. He won't play football ever again, but it doesn't also include the transfers Trayvon Grimes and Van Jefferson that Dan Mullen brought in there. So the recruiting rankings do not factor those guys in, but we know those two guys definitely make this roster better, as we mentioned earlier. Yes, there were a few disappointments, but not too bad when you go back and look at how this compares to recent recruiting and recent transition classes. Now, those are not the barometers moving forward, but it should be kept in mind when looking at this 2018 class.
Yes, that's right. Look, when we say transition class, if you've never heard that term before, basically what we're talking about is Dan Mullen just got on the job. I mean, he's new on the job. He's only been there a couple of months, and he's competing against coaches that have been established. They've got their network of their coaching staffs and their secondary staffs and their relationships with coaches and recruits that they've been building for years in most cases. And so he's got to rebuild that, reestablish. He's setting up his program, got everything else going on. And so he's kind of winging it, trying to figure out which kids are receptive on short notice, which ones he wants on short notice. And so what you see in transition or those first year short time classes, where you have a partial year to recruit, they're always worse. They're always worse. And that's why, Urban Meyer, for all of his top classes in the country at Florida, his worst one was his first year. As a matter of fact, every coach in the post-Spurrier era, their worst class was their first year. That was true of Zook, that was true of Meyer, that was true of Muschamp, that was true of McElwain. And I would guarantee you that will be the same for Mullen. It's going to go up from here. But he still put together the 14th in the nation. And it was and while we're going to break down the stats on that, it was a good effort.
I think a lot of it depends on how you want to break it down. I mean, I agree with you that this class is I think it's better than the predecessor, certainly in terms of McElwain's transition class. I think there are ways to say that it's better than Zook, Meyer, and Muschamp. I think there are ways to say that it's worse than Zook, Meyer, and Muschamp, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, Urban Meyer obviously had some success, and then it sort of comes down to what the product ends up on the field, because that's a lot of Meyer's success was springboarding that first 9-3 year into that recruiting class he brought into 2006. So we'll see what Mullen can do in that capacity.
Yeah, but you mentioned how there's some ways to present it as well. And look, for all of you out there, I guess that sounds like I'm pumping the sunshine a little bit. I'm not. I'm going to give you both sides of this tonight because I've got some concerns as well. And if we're honest with ourselves, not only can we can't put a final grade on this because these guys haven't seen the field and we have to see how they're developed and how they coach and how they show up out there. But we also, even just from a purely on paper recruiting standpoint, we have to see how he assembles classes in the future. This is one class of guys that haven't seen the field yet. So it's going to be an incomplete grade from me. However, when I look at the numbers and compare it to past transition classes at UF, like you said, I see this is the first UF transition class with the blue chips at all the positions I mentioned. It's the highest average composite player rating of any UF transition class, where that point is 9.069. It ties for the most national top 100 recruits in a UF transition class with 4. It's only one shy of Urban Meyer's 2005 transition class of 9 national top 250 players. And McElwain only had 3. So we've almost tripled that top 250 talent compared to what McElwain started out with. And then lastly, 12 blue chip recruits. Now, these were all 4-stars. There were no 5-stars, which that's one of my concerns. It ties 2011 for the most in any transition class. So we see factual data that says, hey, you know what? Despite all the problems around UF football the past few years, Mullen is hitting some benchmarks and doing some things as good as anybody has in recent history as it pertains to this first recruiting class.
And if you look at average national rank, Zook, the average national rank was 345. Meyer was 266. Muschamp was 277. McElwain was 477. And now Mullen's 264. So 264 for Mullen, 266 for – that's the average national ranking for all the recruits in the class. So in Meyer's class, he had 17 total commits and averaged 266 for the national ranking. Mullen, 19 commits, 264. So more commits and a little bit better average national ranking than Urban Meyer's first class. But certainly if you look at top 300 talent, Meyer brought in 15 of those guys and Mullen only brought in 10. So there's a disparity there. But you already mentioned the 4 top 100 guys that he's brought in. My concern with the class has more to do with just balance. Obviously the offense at Florida has been problematic, but and that's certainly been addressed, I think, with some of the things that Mullen has done. But I'm really concerned about the idea that there are 4 safeties, and you mentioned Trey Dean may end up being a corner, but there's 4 safeties. 2 of those guys are blue chips. No corners. There's 2 linebackers. Both of those guys are blue chips, and then the defensive lineman Langham that we talked about is the one blue chip on defense. So really, you're talking 7 players on defense out of a 19-player class. It's offense heavy, and in a situation where last year defensive line was an area of emphasis for McElwain, but he signed 4 linebackers last year, but none of them were above 3-star rating, and they were relatively low-rated 3 stars. And then there was also a 2-star there with LeCedric Brunson. Doesn't mean they're bad players. It just means that was an area where I was really looking for some emphasis on the defensive side of the ball, and that wasn't something that we saw.
Yeah, when you look at it and you break it down here, you have, and I'm just trying to look at what. You look at the best of the best. And Evan McPherson's looked over because he's a kicker, but they signed the top-rated kicker in the nation. They signed 5 players that were top 10 in their positions and 13 that were top 20 in their positions. So when we talk about making the roster better, as we mentioned, the the commit list just in general, there were 12. I believe it was 12 4-stars.
That's right.
12 4-stars. And then you also brought in the transfers Grimes and Jefferson as well to add 2 more to that. So in Dan Mullen's short time, he's added 14 4-star guys, or 14 blue chip guys that, you would hope the percentage there of the roster is slowly, if he can, we're talking about going to the second class and the second class being better than the first class. You hope after the first 2 classes that the blue chip percentage goes up even more. And I think, starting with 5 players that were top 10 in their positions and 13 that were top 20 in their position, I think that speaks to this roster is getting transformed, while it may be transformed slowly, more slow than some of the rivals out there. And I know we'll take a peek at that as well. I think, and we've kind of noticed that we've mentioned this before, with this first class and this first transition class, it needs to be about more about what Florida can do. And then we'll move and worry about, when Mullen can get more relationships built in the state of Florida on the recruiting trail. Just worry about Florida for year 1 and then go, all out in year 2. And look, he went after some big time guys, and he went after them early in year 1. And so what I mean, yes, you can kind of blame him for, maybe striking out a little bit, but look, he was going after some big fish, and he hit on a couple, or missed on a few, hit on a few. But I think when all's said and done, I just like when you bring in that many 4-stars. Yes, and Bill, I know you said you were kind of disappointed with the 5-star, and I was too, and the only one they were really in for was Petit Frere. But when it's all said and done, I'll say I'm happy with the class.
Yeah, I am too for now. And I know we're going to talk about what needs to happen, a little bit later on with 2019. But again, when you look at the transition classes, you can't judge Mullen's his recruiting ability based on the first class. You can't do that in the positive or the negative. But what you can do is say, okay, as a program, as an injection of talent, just like when you're watching the Olympics and they're showing the world record pace, and you're watching the runner, the ice skater, or whatever, whether they're keeping up, or the swimmer. Well, it's only one lap because it's year 1, but we can kind of do that and say, well, where have the great coaches and the bad coaches fit in here? The problem is we've seen Muschamp's transition class do better than Myers. And so obviously, even though it was better, Meyer had a much better career at Florida. And that goes to show you that it takes coaching and recruiting. And that's something we affirm wholeheartedly. It takes both. But the good news in that, seeing how Mullen has built his staff, how he's emulated some of the things Meyer's done, bringing guys he trusts and having a heavy influence of his previous staff they brought from Mississippi State. And now seeing his recruiting, I know a lot of people were upset that they only brought in 19 total guys and they had some spots. Well, Meyer only brought in 17. So I like that. That's one thing that's a similarity. I like that we saw him bring in about the same number of top 250 guys and top 300 guys that are coming in there. I like that because it shows that neither one of them really wanted to take those reaches and just bring bodies to fill spots like we saw both Muschamp and McElwain do. So is it going to end up the same? Is Mullen going to have the same type of success? Is this one class enough to say, hey, we're on pace with the world record? We're going to see this guy win national championships like Meyer did? No, we're not. But to me, it's a little bit comforting. It's lap 1. And so I'm saying I see enough here that I'm certainly not hitting the panic button. And I see enough here that gets me excited for next season.
Yeah. And, you look at the press conference that Mullen had after National Signing Day, and he talked specifically about not taking guys just to take guys, that they wanted to take guys that they'd identified, fit the program, fit what they wanted, both from an attitude perspective and a talent perspective, and that they were comfortable leaving open spots. And that's something, that next year when they recruit, you saw Georgia this year sign 26 guys. Well, one of the reasons they were able to do that is they were able to count some of those early enrollees back to the 2017 class. So now Florida has that ability to count back 2 or 3 guys from this class, depending upon who comes in, if they want to bring in transfers, if they want to sign guys who are higher ranked next year. So they do have that possibility. But just like I said, it's a little bit of one and it's a little bit of the other, because, the other thing that Mullen said that stood out to me during his press conference was that, you win on the offensive and defensive lines and really up front in both sides. And so, in that capacity, he brought in 5 guys. Only 2 of those guys are blue chip quality. But again, there's positive as well, because if you run down the whole list of all of the positions, there's a blue chip quarterback, a blue chip tight end, 2 blue chip running backs, 2 blue chip wide receivers, a blue chip offensive line, 2 blue chip safeties, 2 blue chip linebackers, and a blue chip defensive lineman. The only place where there isn't a blue chip player is cornerback, and there wasn't a cornerback recruit. So, he's filling up all the spots with talent. I do think it's a little bit skewed on the offensive side of the ball, but if there weren't defensive players out there who specifically wanted to come play for Dan Mullen and who fit his system, then he clearly is comfortable saying, we'll wait till next year.
Bill, I know you got this, and you call it the master spreadsheet, and and you did it before you even were a part of this podcast. Like I said, following recruiting, and you've mentioned on here too, it's been a passion of yours, talking about and following the kind of trends that we see in recruiting. And of course, you go back to then, and it's pretty much when Ron Zook took over Florida, and that's when recruiting services really started getting popular as well. And going back to then, recruiting services have changed the way they rank players and the way they rate players. They're trying to come up with the perfect formula throughout the years. But as far as this class goes, and of course, we're not going all the way back to 2002 year by year, and most of it is really speaking to these transition classes. But can fans be happy with what happened today? Or actually, just to explain, good and bad, going back to 2002, what this as an overall class and a transition class can we look forward to?
Well, as a transition class, like we've mentioned, you see, even though we don't see the absolute elites there, and I'm very concerned, Florida hasn't landed a 5-star player since 2015. And that is a 3-cycle drought now that is unprecedented in the history of these rankings at the University of Florida. It's got to stop.
And think about that. You're in the state of Florida where there's a ton of 5-stars.
Yeah, you're talking about the cream of the crop, top 25, 30 guys each year. And I think Georgia had 7 or 8?
Yeah.
Those guys, I can't remember the exact numbers, and it's on our past episode, but they make all SEC at Florida, I think, about between 33% and 50% of the time. I mean, they just have a huge impact. That's your Tim Tebow's, your Percy Harvins, your Brandon Spikes, those type of guys. So they're the ones that change programs. Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama that came and won the national championship game. You got to have those guys. Nobody's winning national championships without them. So that's got to change. But even so, the amount of those 4-stars, those top 100, top 250 players that are coming in, it's so much more than we saw under McElwain. I mean, they tripled that from his first year. Things are getting back to normal. When we compare it to those transition classes, we see semi-elite talent coming in large numbers like it always has at Florida. We see rankings that are very comparable to what those successful coaches have done in those best years at Florida. So this is a good start in a lot of metrics. On the bad side, Florida averaged, I think it was between 2002 and 2013, when you compare their ranking against the national rankings of Tennessee, Florida State, and Georgia. That's their 3 principal rivals. And these days, a lot of people would throw LSU in there. They averaged on a given year 2.08. And out of those 14 years, 9 of those years, they were either first or second among those 4 schools. So they were recruiting better in most years than Florida State, Georgia, and Tennessee, or maybe second. They were right there at the top. But since McElwain has showed up, it's fallen to an average of 3.33 a year, and they've had 5 straight finishes of either 4th or 3rd. That's got to change. Because, yes, it takes coaching, but it takes talent too. And right now, the money games for Florida, they are not recruiting as well. And that was only 3rd this year. However, I'm going to counterbalance that. Transition averages, and that includes Meyer, that includes Zook, that includes Muschamp, and all those guys, are 3.6. So even though 3rd is not necessarily good enough, it's right in line. And it kind of once again goes back into that fact of, hey, we see the talent, but we also see some teams ahead of them that we're not comfortable with. They're definitely being outpaced by a few teams that they need to catch up to. but there's enough here to say, okay, there's some good pieces coming in. We see good process from Mullen. We see him behaving like a big boy coach. We see some of the results we want to see. And in my opinion, we've got enough to feel like we might have something going here.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to see from this class is probably what you see from most transition classes, which, I mean, if you look back at 2011, Muschamp had 19 commits. 13 of those guys saw playing time, and eight of the guys ended up being starters. And that's probably what you can imagine, what you think you're going to see. But those starters were Jeff Driscoll, Marcus Roberson, Jacoby Brissett, Jabari Gorman, Lichez Purifoy, Trip Thurman, Deontay Saunders, Hunter Joyer, guys like that. So nobody that we're talking about who's a transcendent player. And to your point, Bill, most of the time those transcendent players, the guys you remember who play 3 years in a league for 3 years, are the guys who come in and are 5-star guys. So, you look at 2012 for Muschamp, the guys who came in were DJ Humphries, Jonathan Bullard, Dante Fowler, Brian Poole, Marcus May, Matt Jones, Damian Jacobs. So guys who were, and Antonio Morrison. So guys that we remember as real difference makers are the guys who came in the second year. And so that's really what we're going to be looking for Mullen is, this is really a depth class to sort of bridge the gap between the coaching change. I would not expect somebody to come out and win a Heisman Trophy out of this. If they do, obviously that's great, but that's not what my expectations would be. My expectations would be you're going to get somewhere between 7 to 9 starters. They're going to be solid players. And when next year's class comes in, then you're going to have really, really elite talent coming in to supplement the guys who are already there. The other thing I would say is just from the standpoint of the competition, you look at Georgia averaging over the last 4 years, they've averaged 4th nationally, 2.8 in the conference, 17.5 blue chips. Florida has averaged 14.5 nationally, 6.3 in the conference, 9 blue chips. And so Georgia has double the starters that Florida does. And that's just a reality. And I think that's where some of my disappointment comes with not getting some of these really, really high level talents like Petit Frere or Nesta Silvera, is you really need those guys to compete. And it wouldn't have skewed these numbers at all, right? So Florida State is 5.8 nationally with 14.3 blue chips. Tennessee is 13.8 with 9.8 blue chips over the last 4 years. All 3 of those teams have more aggregate talent than Florida over the last 4 recruiting cycles. And so, a commitment from Silvera or Petit Frere would have really sort of just said, these are the types of guys Mullen's going to bring in. And that's where some of my disappointment comes in. I think based on history, this transition class is right in line with some of those other coaches who've done a really good job in the second year at Florida from a recruiting standpoint. And I think that's probably what we'll see next year.
Hey, one thing you mentioned, and it kind of made me think, you are absolutely right about how when you have these transition classes, a lot of them don't pan out. And I think that there's several reasons for that, but part of it is because in some ways you're dealt the hand that was given to you by your predecessor. Like McElwain had recruited a lot of these kids and they had committed, and Mullen can't blow up the whole class. And that's not to say they should have been, because some of those are good players that they brought on board that he kept, but they may or may not have been good fits, and you kind of have to take what you can get. And you kind of have to scramble to find players that not only fit your system, but that are willing to either stay on board, and you could have kind of a square peg and round hole situation, or find guys elsewhere that are just willing to come in. And so you don't have the luxury of handpicking and recruiting for a year or 2 years. And so that's why I'm, number one, not a huge fan of loading up in these transition classes, because like you said, you waste scholarships. You tie up scholarships for next year when you can have a bigger class after you have had that time. But it's also why I'm kind of a big fan of leaning on more transfers, because at least then you're taking known commodities, guys that in many cases have put college tape together, like you saw with Van Jefferson. I'm not sure how much Trevon Grimes has got, but again, he's a guy that's a year out of school. They've had, pre-existing relationship probably in recruiting. He knows who he is. And so I would rather him come in and take a guy that is a known college commodity in some cases than scramble and take a guy that might be a bad fit, but he's a guy you could convince as a high school player to commit. So that's why I'm not uncomfortable with either the transfers or the smaller class size.
Yeah, we've done a lot of talking about the transition class, but also just kind of overall, for the class in Florida. Is there some valid excuse for Dan Mullen and missing out on some guys because he followed Jim McElwain and he followed a 4-7 season. He's followed he's following coaches Muschamp and McElwain who haven't been able to put an offense on the field. Florida's hasn't been excited to watch on the football field for a long time. Is Dan Mullen fighting the reputation of Florida on the recruiting trail? A lot of people say, well, good recruiters are good recruiters. And, most of the time I'm a no excuses type of guy and type of fan. But, sometimes there are valid excuses when you are a brand new head coach. You are having to, pick up the pieces from what the previous staff left and trying to shed a reputation that, Florida can't get it done on the offensive side of the ball. Mullen really has to prove that on the field, at least, that he can get something out of this talent. And I think once you start getting done on the field, it makes it easier on the trail. Now, there is some truth to a good recruiter is a good recruiter, but he can help himself with some results on the field in 2018 for the 2019 class. So I think overall as well, I see there are some fans who are disappointed on missing out on some of the big guys in Petit Frere. Talking about the 5-star and Silvera, losing him to Miami. But sometimes there are excuses of missing out on big time talent when you're following something that didn't go so well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make excuses, and I'm disappointed that those guys didn't come in. At the same time, I do think we need to remember that it was 2009 the last time Florida scored any points. Yeah. And so if you're an offensive player and you're thinking about going to a school anywhere near the state of Florida, why you were 9 years old the last time they did anything that the last time they lit up the swamp. And so I can understand why some of those people are saying, hey, you got to show me before I'm going to make a decision to come in there. At the same time, Emory Jones has decided to come. He convinced a lot of the people that McElwain had already had sort of in tow to come, and that he convinced Garage to stay on. So on the offensive side of the ball, I think he actually did a really good job in terms of bringing people in, which is maybe why that doesn't quite hold as much water as you might think, just because it was the defensive side of the ball that he struggled to bring in recruits all the way across the board. It's a little, like I said earlier, it's more tilted toward the offensive side of the ball, but then again, that may be what we need just because of all the struggles that there have been over the last 9 years.
I want to say this too, guys, and somebody actually requested that I say this tonight, and I think they can make a good point. If you counted Trevon Grimes and Van Jefferson, the 2 wide receiver transfers they had in there, part of that 4-man, 4-star, quartet we talked about, if you counted them in the rankings, Florida's got a top 10 class. And while I know that you could counter and say, well, we don't know who everybody else has brought in, I seriously doubt any of those schools have 2 transfers that were, a top 50 and a top 100 recruit there. And plus, a lot of them do count. If they come from a junior college and transfer to your school, they are in the rankings. So I think it's a very valid thing to do, just understanding there is a possibility that somebody out there has a transfer we can't account for. And if they did count right now, and this was sitting at the number 9 class, the narrative is entirely different at that point. And this may even be considered somewhat of a national story if they were signing letters of intent today. And it would be far and away the best transition class Florida signed. So I think there is a lot of positive here. Yes, the fact that the talent gap continues to widen because of what Georgia is doing and what Alabama has done and how Florida State looks like hey, let's face it, I think Willie Taggart's going to do well in recruiting there. Florida's got to get some elite talent in there. They've got to get the roster back up to where it can compete at an elite level. So overall, yes, it's got to get better. Here's the good news. Every new coach at Florida who's had these lower-rated transition classes has seen an increase in their second-year class. We call that the bump year. There's always a hype that surrounds that second year for a new coach because he can sell his vision and talk about how great it's going to be, and he hasn't taken a loss on the field yet. It's still fresh in their mind. There are those excuses because the data's not out there to condemn them. So the classes always get better, and they have improved in every case of a new coach in recent Florida history by 7 spots in the national rankings. So if you are 14th, next year your class was at least ranked 7th, and it averages 8.5 spots improvement per year. So we can expect that with this 14th class, Dan Mullen's probably going to end up with about the 7th best class in the country, give or take a spot or 2. And Is that going to be enough to catch Georgia? Probably not, unless they get that transcendent quarterback and Emory Jones turns out to be that guy, or they find that guy next year. But it is definitely a step in the right direction. It's getting back to normalcy in recruiting for Florida. And in my opinion, that's what they have to worry about for now. I don't care if they had Nick Saban and Urban Meyer coaching this year, they weren't going to beat Georgia on the recruiting trail. It just wasn't going to happen in year one. And need to take a few years to get this going. We have to see dramatic improvement, but I believe we possibly can in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and I think there's the discouraging part is Florida brought in 10 top 300 players and Georgia brought in 12 top 100 players. And that's where you really start to see the gap between the two teams. I mean, basically Georgia probably brought in 14 starters or something today when you look at it over the amount of talent they brought in. However, if you go back and look at 2016, Kirby Smart's first class, he brought in 14 blue chip guys, and he supplemented that with quite a few 3-stars to sort of raise their ranking up around 7th or 8th. But in his transition class, he brought in 14 blue chips. And if you count Grimes and Jefferson, in Mullen's transition class, he's brought in 14 blue chips. So, again, I look at that and I see that gap with Georgia, and that's a problem. But it's a transition class, and you can't hold him to that standard. If you look at it from just purely a star ranking or like a 24/7, 0.9013 or whatever it is rating that 24/7 does, where they actually have decimal places to rank people, Florida's third in the SEC. They're behind Alabama and Georgia. Those are the two teams that they're behind, and so they're going to have to close that gap definitely. But they're third in the SEC. That's not bad, particularly in a transition year.
Yeah, guys. We've been going for a little while here. Look at the players that they brought in. I guess, we have to kind of go back to the early signing day period too. But guys who can make an impact early. Of course, we've seen the struggles on the field. And Florida can use an infusion of talent on the field to get some better results. We mentioned the depth they have at wide receiver and at running back. But we just need some help on the offensive line. We know quarterbacks talked about ad nauseum. We know the fix that needs to be there. On the offensive side of the ball, is there a guy or two that you're really looking forward to from this freshman class that you're looking forward to seeing overall, or actually even make an impact early?
I'll let you have the first one, Will.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit off the board here. I think probably the most important guy of the class for next year is either Noah Banks or Chris Blake. There were really some issues at guard last year for Florida, and just being able to, they're 3-star guys. They're not, top 500 players, but at the same time, the depth in the offensive line to be able to bring in competition there, to have solidified guard spots, or to be able to move Martez Ivey into guard because Garage is playing tackle. That's really where I think Mullen wants to go. He wants to run the ball. He runs the ball more than 50% of the time. He's going to have a quarterback back there who runs in some capacity. I just think that the offensive line is where we're going to need to see the step up, and hopefully one of those guys can really help solidify those guard spots.
Yeah, that's interesting. It may be a place where transfer John DeLance could come in and help as well. Because if he can step in and tackle, and like you said, Ivy can slide down the guard, that would really, really help, because you're right, guard has got to get better.
Yeah, I guess if you guys for a playmaker, I'm still looking at Dameon Pierce, even though running back is stacked. I think he's the special talent at running back. My worry is he has a lot of yards on him coming out of high school. I mean, his high school team ran him into the ground. But he did it well. Don't get me wrong. He had some great stats. If you go back and look at it, even up there was Zamir White, who committed to Georgia, big 5-star. A lot of people were wondering why Pierce isn't valued as a 5-star, comparing it to him playing in the state of Georgia, as well as good as that state is. But even though Florida is deep there, don't know if Malik Davis comes back fully healthy. He got hurt late in the season against Georgia when he hurt his knee there. So is he fully healthy when the season starts? But Pierce and Scarlett, of course, Florida gets Scarlett back. They're kind of the same running back a little bit, I think. So that may hurt Pierce's ability to get on the field too. But we'll see how much Dan Mullen rotates backs early. We know Jim McElwain had a propensity of doing that the last couple of years and shuffling running backs a lot. But the running back is a spot where true freshmen really can come in and excel, and we've seen it all over the Southeastern Conference. We've seen it all over the nation, but particularly you go to Georgia, and it seems like they have a true freshman back every year that makes a mark on the field. So I think Dameon Pierce is just the the power, the speed that he can bring. I think he's still I'll compare him to Jordan Scarlett, but I actually like his high school tape much more than I did Jordan Scarlett's.
Yeah, he's a good-looking back. I think my only problem with that is how loaded Florida appears to be at running back. But I can understand if you feel like he's a transitional talent, then hey, man, I sure hope he's that guy.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go a little different here. If you want to talk about offense, I'm going to go Kyle Pitts. Florida really has been lacking a tight end, a guy they can count on at that position that can make a difference on the seam routes. They can be an outlet, and especially if they end up with Emory Jones, it sure would be great if he had a tight end friend to help him out there and when he's in trouble. He's the first 4-star tight end they brought, I think, since 2012, when or maybe even 2011 it was. It's been a while, and he's a guy that seems like he flew under the radar a little bit, but he's a fairly high-rated guy. I believe he's 6'5.5", 235 pounds, and he can impact the passing game. He's a guy that I think could come in and make a difference on offense.
Man, too bad he doesn't have Greg Nord coaching him.
Yeah. I think he'll be okay.
I mean, just think about it. Florida really hasn't had a tight end since Jake McGee. I mean, McElwain's first year got to use the tight end a pretty good bit and a pretty good talent. I mean, he transferred from Virginia. He got hurt. Muschamp. His first year, he got hurt with Muschamp, right? And he got to play under McElwain for 1 year. And that the tight end position was used a good bit with Goolsby and McGee there, and just ever since then hasn't really been able to be counted on consistently. So I'd love for Kyle Pitts to come in and be a playmaker Florida can count on.
Yeah, I think a lot of his playing time is going to be determined on his blocking. I know some of Florida's tight ends have struggled with blocking and the pass protection, and that's sort of been the limiting factor. You can't put him out there if you're going to struggle in pass protection. So, certainly I think a lot of guys come in from high school and are really good pass catchers in that position. The question will be, how is he as a blocking tight end?
On the defensive side of the ball, and I got to call him out just because he's been on the podcast, it's going to be Amari Burney for me. So, just his size, his athleticism, he can stick his nose in on tackles if he needs to be a linebacker at some point. He may can pack on some pounds and be that guy. They can keep him at safety if they need to, move him in the box as an extra defender if they need to. He's so versatile, so fast that I think he can fit in a Todd Grantham style defense. He can go, he can blitz if you need him to, he can run blitz, he can fill a gap in the run game if he has to. I really like what Amari Burney could bring to the table in the defensive side of the ball.
You took my pick, but I'll pick another one because you're right. I like Burney. Great kid.
You can just extend on that.
Well, he's a guy that could even grow into a dynamic linebacker. Especially in that defense. So, I mean, who knows? But, I mean, I think he's definitely got the wheels to stay in the secondary. I'm not saying that. But I can't wait to see where he ends up. For me, who did I have to go with here? Oh, Trey Dean. He's a guy that I just, from what I've seen and read and heard, he's a guy that could be a dynamic playmaker in the secondary. I'm hoping he can stay out on the corner like Will and I were talking about earlier. But if nothing else, I think he's a guy that can help them in all phases at safety. And they need some depth back there. Really, they need starting help at safety if they can't get that sorted out. We'll just kind of have to see how it goes in spring. But I believe he's coming in early, and I expect to see him on the field. I do not expect a redshirt.
For me, it's David Reese. So he's the 4-star linebacker, ranked 296 nationally.
Wait. David Reese is already on the team.
Yeah, more than anything, I want both David Reese's out there. It's too bad Vern's not still in the booth, because I would just love to see Vern try to figure that one out on CBS when you got those guys in there. But linebacker has been an issue at Florida, especially over the last couple of years. Last year, especially trying to cover running backs out of the backfield, just got killed by John Kelly at Tennessee and some of the Kentucky backs and tight ends. Reese brings the ability to do some of the things that some of those outside linebackers couldn't do last year. Certainly, the defense is changing, but somebody with Reese's skills is going to be is going to be able to step in right away and help in a place where quite honestly, Florida doesn't have a whole lot of depth, or at least not elite talent depth. And so it'll be interesting to see whether he can step in right away. I think he's one of the guys who has the ability to play right away just because of the numbers situation.
Yeah, guys, I know, we've been going on for a little while here, and I know we had a ton of information to throw into this podcast with numbers and all that good stuff. And if there's anything we left out that you you two guys definitely want to hit on. Look, I know we'll have another podcast next week. We'll talk even more about this class. We'll see what some of the rivals did and how Florida compared to FSU and Georgia and Tennessee, and look, and other transitional classes. Look, Florida State was going through a transition. Texas A&M in the SEC with Jimbo Fisher was going through a transition. Tennessee as well. So I think some of your rivals and your in-conference teams were going through transition. How Florida compared to those. But I know you guys had a lot of info you wanted to get out there. So before we sign off, if there's anything unique or whatever you guys wanted to hit on, go right ahead.
Yeah, the last thing I kind of wanted to say about that was just that I think this was a new experience for all of us. And I think there were times where I forgot that today. And I know that even seasoned recruiting fans forgot this, is that we had that early signing day. And so Mullen wasn't looking for anywhere from 17 to 25 letters of intent to come across the fax today. He was recruiting 10 to 12 guys, and they ended up only with 6. And that made it, especially the way it was stretched out throughout the day, it made it feel like it was so barren because they were sitting at 2 or 3 letters of intent to come across the fax for half the day. And so they saw 5 or 6 guys when they had room for maybe 3 to 4 of those. When they chose to go elsewhere, it seemed like they were completely striking out. But really, they missed out on 6. They added 6. They had a total of 19. It's a perfectly respectable class size. The numbers look pretty good. And so, again, like I said at the beginning of the show, try to separate the emotional flow and the ebbs, throughout the day of how that fluctuated, and the morale went up and it went down and it went up again. Try to separate those feelings in this day from the overall effort, because the overall effort shows that there were some very good things going here. There's some things to be encouraged by. There's certainly not like instant dominance, and there's some concerns. There's some things that have got to get better in 2019. But again, for me, it's a good start, and it's an incomplete grade. But compared to transition classes, for now, I'm going to give it an A. That could be an F next year. It can say an A. You got to keep going. You're only as good as your last class, so we'll see what he's got.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's really going to be what ends up happening on the field, right? But the one thing I'd say is, if you go back, I already mentioned that in 2016, Kirby Smart brought in 14 blue chips. 2017, he brought in 20. So that's really, I think, where this has to go for Mullen. And, I think, to your point, Bill, you give him an incomplete for this year because this year's tied to next year. How it transitions into next year, we can certainly look at the past trends. And if you look at trends in 2003, Florida had 11 starters come out of that class. 2006, they had 11 starters. 2012, they had 11 starters. And 2016, they had 10. So the bulk of Mullen's team is going to come from next year's class. This class is sort of hinting at what's to come next year, and I think that's a promising thing. It's just one of those things, like you said, you were hoping for 8 faxes to come across instead of 6 today.
Yeah, and they did okay. And let's face it, I mean, it could be worse. Next year they could come out like Arizona State, where they like 70th or something in the nation with Herm Edwards out there. I can't remember what it was. I don't even know where they ended up.
I would never understand that hire. Never.
I don't even know where they ended up, but it could be worse. Actually, they rebounded all the way to 36, I guess. But I mean, look, it could go anywhere from here. And so, if you're a sunshine pumper, try to put the brakes on a little bit. If you're the guy that is a cliff jumper, try to step back a little bit. We got to take time. Let's have a healthy debate throughout the year, and we'll see where it goes. And one last thing from me. I promised last week and forgot that I give Andrew Jeffries a shout out, man. He's one of our followers on Twitter and a listener, man. Thanks for listening to the show.
Oh, I had that one on the list too. So there we go.
I totally took your shout out.
Well, I took Amari Burney from you, so
yeah. Hey, not just Andrew, but thanks to all of you who have supported us so long now and have been listening and continue to dialogue with us, man.
Absolutely, that's a big part of partnership with Channel 4 and WJXT, and hopefully get this thing out there even more. Guys, one more, like a quick thought, right quick. Any worry that FSU and Taggart, had a good finish to the day? And ultimately finishing in front of Florida. I tweeted it out last Friday. I think it shouldn't really come as a surprise. Looking at he recently head coach at USF, had relationships in the state of Florida, especially in that Tampa area, was recruiting the state heavy for Oregon and that class. So he already had some established relationships in the state. And look, when we were talking about an opening for the Florida head coaching position, Willie Taggart's name was brought up, and mostly because of his recruiting prowess, and you know how he could recruit the state of Florida. So I don't think it's, look, they're ranked 11th in if you want to use rankings as the barometer, when it's all said and done, they were ranked 11th in the 24/7 composite, Florida 14th, so not that big of a difference here. But a lot of people were, a week or so, 2 weeks ago, when Florida State was lowly ranked, a lot of people were poking fun, but they ended up having a pretty nice finish as well.
They did, and I poked fun of them because that was what we do. But I believe, said on the show, and I know I said, to different people at times, that they were going to hard charge and could finish above Florida. I mean, this is not a surprise. As far as where they finished, I think they had one additional blue chip, like a 4-star, 13 to Florida's 12, but then they had one less top 100 recruit. I mean, very comparable classes. And in this case, we're going to find out who the better coach is and who the better recruiter is going forward, because, again, year 2 is going to tell the tale.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be concerned because you need to beat your rivals. And so the fact that Florida's ahead of Tennessee is important. The fact that Tennessee's behind Florida State is important. Those things have to change. Doesn't mean that, the sky is falling or that Mullen's a bad recruiter or a bad coach or anything like that. But it does mean it needs to be fixed, because you can't lose to Florida State every year. You've already now lost in year 1 in recruiting. I mean, yeah, it's close, but, that one extra blue chip, maybe one extra starter who makes a play in a game that you're playing in a couple of years from now. So, you need to be concerned about those things. You have to look at your rivals and see how they're doing. But at the same time, again, it's we'll see how it happens, because if you have 3 extra blue chips next year over the 2-year period, you've done better. So it's an easy gap to make up.
Hey, one last thing, Dave. Somebody just came across Twitter and said we didn't say a word about Dorian Gerald. Do you want to comment on him before we sign off?
Sure. He is supposed to announce on Friday. It looks like. There is some word out there that Florida just may move on. I haven't been able to confirm that. We've just kind of been busy keeping up with signing day and trying to get ready for the show and everything. So, the next day or so, of course, tomorrow being Thursday, try and confirm on that of what's happening there. I know on Twitter he said he needs somebody to get Von Miller in contact with him, and Von Miller went to Texas A&M, and I know Texas A&M's in the running, so that may be something. I know he later tweeted that this has been a hard decision for him, and seems like he's still thinking about it, but who knows? I don't even know why he's waiting until Friday and didn't make his decision today. So we'll see. I think somebody said he wanted to make the announcement in his hometown in South Carolina, so that may have something to do with it. So, yeah, we'll see. And kind of just finishing up that Florida State thought, Will, according to what you said, as long as I think you can keep it close, with your rivals, you keep the recruiting close, that's when coaching can start taking over.
I just want to beat them at everything.
Oh, yeah, I want to beat them at everything. Don't get me wrong. If I had a choice, it would be, yeah.
Well, and I don't really want to beat them because of their incompetence. I want to beat them because we're better, right? And so, so that's the thing. It's those standards of excellence that Mullen keeps talking about, the standards and expectations. And the standards and expectations of Florida is you're going to win SEC titles and you're going to win national titles. And this class is an acceptable first step forward. I'm not sure that I'd say it's a great step forward in that path. I think it's a solid step forward, and we'll see where he goes from here.
Oh, this was a fun one and a roller coaster of a day. I'm worn out, guys.
Yeah, me too, man. I love National Signing Day, but man, it'll take it out of me.
Yeah, not to mention to the fact, as soon as I walked in the door, I just my nose started running, then I started not feeling good. So it probably just the fatigue working in.
Yeah, it's probably some of those flu-laced rags I've been mailing you.
I don't need that. All right, Will, what you got? Of course, let me let you plug Reading Reaction here. What you got going on? I'm pretty sure you'll wrap up National Signing Day with your thoughts on there too. Anything else for the later in the week?
Yeah, so I got a National Signing Day article. It's going to drop tonight. I got to finish writing it after we're done here, and then tomorrow I'm going to be writing about how far Florida is away from the national title, and what recruiting can tell us about that, and sort of predicting, or at least pointing towards what Mullen has to do in year 2 to get him towards that goal.
Nice, and we'll try and discuss that on next week's Gators Breakdown. So you can find Bill Sykes on Twitter. You can give him a follow there at RealBSykes, and Will find him at readingreaction.com and find him on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Also, remember you can find us on newsforjacks.com where you can get all your links to SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube for Gators Breakdown. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. It's been a fun signing day. Dan Mullins first, and we'll be sure to follow all the action, and we'll look for Dorian Gerald's commitment on Friday and see what comes from there. So, guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown.